Hey everyone, in today's video I'll be showing you how to build this YouTube search app using Flask and the YouTube search API. So to demonstrate how it works, if I type in something like learn Flask and hit search, it will show me the first 9 results and I can see the thumbnail, the title, the length, and I can click on one and it will take me to that video on YouTube. I can also do I'm feeling lucky. So if I say something like learn Python and hit I'm feeling lucky, then it will take me to the first result directly. So that's what we'll be building in this video. If you want to get the code for this video and follow along, I have a link in the description below. Also, if you're interested in getting my Flask cheat sheet, which just has some very common things that you would do in Flask in one place, you can get that from my website, prettyprinted.com/Flask cheat sheet. I'll also have a link in the description below, so you can get this after you're done watching the video. So now let's get into creating this app. So to begin, let's take a look at the template that we have. So basically we have this header, search YouTube, an input, 2 buttons. Then we have these 9 boxes. So we have a placeholder for the thumbnails. We have a place for the title. We have a link to view the video, and then we see the length of the video here. So what we can do now is look at the actual code, and you'll see that it's pretty simple. This is just Bootstrap. So here we have the section at the top where we have the buttons and the input, and then we have the cards just repeated over and over 9 times, and that's it. So it's a pretty simple example. So the first thing we want to do is we want to get this template into our Flask app, because right now I'm just viewing the index.html directly. So what I can do is I can start up the terminal, and I'm going to use pip env to install Flask. So pip env install Flask, and we'll just wait for that to install. Okay, so now we can start up the shell. So pip env shell, and we'll create a folder called Flask YouTube search. So this is where our code will go, and we'll start with a dunder init.py and say from Flask import Flask, create the create app function. So create app, we'll have settings file equal to settings.py. Let's call this config file, instantiate the app, and add the config. So app config.from py file, pass in config file. Then we'll return this app at the end. And then for our configuration, we're going to use python.env. So pip env install python.env, just like that. And we'll create 2 files. So in our base directory, if I can get to it. So .env and .flask env. So .flask env will have a Flask env, so the environment, which will be development, so debug mode is enabled, and the Flask app is the location of the app, and it's Flask YouTube search, which is the name of the directory we just created. And then in the .env file, I'll add any other configuration I need. I'll only need one, which we'll get to later, but I'll have that file ready then. So now I have the create app file. Now I want to add the settings.py. So settings.py, nothing's going to be in it for now, but I'll update it later. And then I'll create a routes.py. So this is going to have our route. So this will be a blueprint. So from Flask import blueprint. Then we'll create the blueprint. We'll call this main. So this is blueprint. Main is the name. It takes in dunder name of the file. And then we can try, this is the index, so main.route/, and we're going to return a template, so render template, and this template is going to be index.html. So I need to import render template, and I need to create a template directory, so templates, and then I can move my index.html file into templates. And I'll also do something similar for static. And I'll move my album.css into static. Okay, so now that I have this blueprint, I can go back to dunder init and import it. So from .routes import main, And then I can do app register blueprints and then main. So let's see if this is enough to get the app to work. So we'll try Flask run. And then we'll go to our app. So it's 127.0.0.1 port 5000. And we see it appears here. So it looks like it's almost done, but we're actually missing one style. So if we open up the source and we go to album.css, we see that we get a 404 because we don't actually have the CSS being loaded. So let's fix that. Let's go to index.html. And then this album.css needs to have URL4 static. So URL4 and then static. And then the file name is going to be that album.css. So I can close out that, put the closing percent and bracket. And now if I run this again, we see unknown tag URL4. That's because it shouldn't have the percent, it should be double brackets. So let's try changing that and running it again. And we see that it works and the style has changed. If we go to source, we see the location of the CSS has been updated. It is now album.css. So we have this loaded. So now what we can start thinking about is bringing in the API for YouTube. So first I'm going to install the request library. So pip env install requests. So we're going to do everything inside of routes. So we can go ahead and import requests here. And then we need to get the information about the API. So let's go to Google. And here's the documentation, which we'll get to in a moment. First, we need to create the credentials to actually use the API. So once you log into the Google Developer Console, and I'll put a link to this in the description below if you can't get to it through Google, you want to create a project. And I'm just going to use the default name, create. And I'll wait a moment for it to actually finish creating. Okay, so it's ready. Then I can go to enable APIs and services. And this will show you a bunch of different APIs that Google has available. We want the YouTube data API version 3. So not analytics, not reporting, not ads reach. We want data API. So this first one. And then once this is done, we can hit enable. And now the API is available on our account. So the last thing we need to do is create credentials. So click on this button, create credentials, and then just fill out this information here. So the YouTube data API version 3, we want to call from a web server and we want the public data. So we click on what credentials do I need, and it will give us this API key. We can copy this and put it in our app. So if we go back to the app, I'm going to put this in the .env file and I'll call this YouTube API key, and I'll just create a string for it like this. And really I don't even need a string because this isn't a Python file. So YouTube API key equals, and then that, and then I'll go to settings and I'll use import OS, and then we'll say YouTube, we'll just use the same key. So YouTube API key is equal to os.environ.get and then YouTube API key. So this will then end up in the configuration for our app because it's coming from this config file and we're using from py file here. So by using python.env, every time we run Flask run, it will take everything in the .env file here and put it into our environment. So when we have settings.py in our app, it will retrieve that environment variable and get the API key for us. So now let's try performing a simple request to make sure that everything works. So let's go to our route. And what we want to do is first get the search URL. So this is going to be the URL for the API to search. So we can go to the documentation and we can go to reference and then search. So we want list, and this will show us the URL. So this is the URL here. So we can copy that and put it in our code just under search URL like that. And then we can perform a request. So let's say R equals request get and then search URL. And then we need some parameters for this. So we'll create a dictionary for this. So let's call this search params. And one for sure that we need is the key. So the key is going to be the API key. And to get the API key from the configuration, first we need to import current app, and then we can do current app.config and then reference the actual key. So the key is going to be YouTube API key. So we can just put this here in the config, and that's going to put the API key from the configuration into our search parameters. So next thing we need is an actual search term. So we can use Q, because if we go to the documentation and look at the parameters that are available, we see Q is the query term to search for. So whatever we put there is what we will search for. So let's try learn Flask as the search query. And then let's think about anything else that we need. So if we go back to the documentation, let's see what's required. We see part is required, and it says it needs to be set to snippet. So let's do that. So part and then snippet. Finally, we have 9 options on our page. So we want to return 9 results. So there should be something for the number of results. And we see max results. So we want max results to be 9. So max results is equal to 9, just like that. So we will perform the requests using the search parameter. So params equals search params. And then we'll display the text. We'll just print it out. So print r.text. So this just shows us everything that gets returned. So if we start up the Flask app, hopefully there are no errors, and then go back and just refresh the page, all that code will run, and then it will still render the template because we have it there. It's a little slower because it's accessing the API. But now if we go back and look at our console, we see some data from YouTube. So basically we see the titles. So this one video is called Flask versus Django, which is better. I see another video called Python Flask tutorial for beginners. So we know that we can get all this data. Now what we want to do is we want to collect all the video IDs, and we want to basically put them in a list so we can perform another query to the YouTube API to get specific data for each video, because right now this is just a basic overview of each video, but we want more specific data so we can put it on our page here, like the duration. So what I can do is I can look for the ID. So if I just look here, we see there's an ID value, and then there's a kind, and there's a video ID. So to make sure I only get videos, I'll go back to the API and I'll look for where it talks about the type of result that it will return. So let's see. We have type, and we want videos. So we'll just add that to the parameters. Now when we search, we should only get videos in return. So now let's convert this to JSON so we can actually use it. And let's look at the structure of the results so we can go through it and get the data that we want. So if we go to the top where it first begins, we see we have items. So everything here is just like an overview, but we have items. So our JSON items. And then we can get like each item. So let's say the first item, and then we can get like the ID and the video ID. So I'm just looking at the dictionary and just using the keys that I need to get the data that I want. So I have to use 3 different keys just to get the video ID here. So let's try this. We're going to print out the video ID for the very first result. So let's try that. So we see the ID here. So what we want to do is we want to loop over these items and basically append them to a list so we have access to all the video IDs. So I'll create a variable called video IDs, and this will be an empty list. And I'll say for results in, and we can make this results. So results equals r.json. And then we can just use items. So we'll go back to having the ID and the video ID, but this will just give us each individual video. So for result in results, we want to append to that video ID. So video IDs dot append, and then we want to append the ID. So we don't have to reference the number anymore because we're looking at each individual instance. So we use result and then ID, video ID. So now let's print out video IDs to make sure that's working. And then run this again. And now we see a list of video IDs. So I should have 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay. So now that I have that, I want to use the other part of the YouTube API to get specific information about videos. So I'll create another URL up here. Let's call this video URL. And we'll go to the documentation and we have videos and then lists. So this should have a place for the URL, and it does. So we'll just copy this URL and put it in video URL, the variable. So I'm going to perform a request here, and it's going to be similar to search. So what I'll do is r equals request get video URL. And then the params are going to be video params, which I'll create here. So video params equals an empty dictionary. We need the key, so this part will be the same. But we're not performing a query, so we want to pass the IDs that we have. So let's look at the documentation to see how we pass the IDs. We have this ID filter, and it can be a comma separated list. So what we can do is we can join everything in our list to get the IDs. So ID is going to be equal to video IDs. Well, actually, it's going to be a comma and then dot join. So we're going to join the comma string with everything in this list. So video IDs. The next thing that we need is the part. So let's see what the part tells us. So now we have more options for the part. This is just the information that we can get. So we can get like content details, file details, live streaming details. But really what we want is we want the snippet, which is just the overview. And we also want the content details, which will give us the duration of the video. If we wanted things like the number of views on the video, then we would use statistics, but we're not doing that in this video. So we just want snippet and content details, and they're comma separated. So what I'll do here is part and then snippet and content details. Let's just copy this so it's exactly the same. Content details just like that. And also we want max results to be 9 as well. So we can just copy this and put it here. So this should be everything we need for the video parameters. So let's make sure we can perform this request. We'll return r.text. And let's take a look. If we run the app, nothing fails. And we see the information for the video. So like we see the duration, which is in a weird format, which we'll handle momentarily. But we see the description, we see title, we see the tags, we see the thumbnails. So next thing we want to do is we want to gather all that information and put it into a list of dictionaries so we have all the relevant information for each video. So if we start that here, first we're going to loop over the results. Well, actually we need to convert this to JSON first. So results equals r.json, and we can use items because it's similar to the results here. So we can say for result and results. And then what we want to do is, let's call this video data. And what we want is we want the ID. We might not use that for anything. We want the URL. We want the thumbnail. We want the duration. And we want the title. So let's get all that information. So the ID is going to be pretty simple. Let's just go to the very top of this result so we can see what it looks like. So just looking for the very first one. There's a lot going on here because the descriptions are a little longer, so it's taking up a lot of space. So let me try printing out the results so it's a little more clear. And we'll comment this out. And then get rid of this r.text. So this should be a little more clear. Okay, so now we see a result, and here's where it starts. So it starts here, and then we see ID. So it's just going to be results ID. Then we want the URL, and we kind of have to build that. So it's going to use the ID. I'll skip that. We need the thumbnail. So let's see, thumbnail. We have thumbnails. So results, thumbnails, and then it has multiple levels. So where did that go? Thumbnails is here. Then we have default, we have medium, we have high. So since ours is 480 by 360, we want to use high. So high, just like that. And then inside of high, we have the URL. For the duration, let's just put the duration in here directly. So it's under content details. So content details followed by duration. And then the title should be on the same level as snippets. So snippets followed by title. And then we'll just leave URL blank for now, and then put commas after everything so it doesn't fail. Remove the comments, and then what we can do is print out video data to see if we can get everything that we want. So let's take a look. Okay, so indices must be integers or slices, not stir. So this should be a result instead of results. So I just added that S by accident. So now let's try this again. Okay, so thumbnails does not exist. So I believe this is going to be under snippets. So snippets and then thumbnails. So let's try that again. And it should be, what is it? Snippet. So just snippet, not snippets. Okay, so it looks like it worked. And looking here on the console, we see the ID, the URL is blank. We have the location of the thumbnail, we have the duration, and we have the title. So now we need to build the URL. So let's take a look at what a URL looks like. So let's say learn Flask YouTube, and let's just go to a video. So we have this one, and we'll just copy the link and put it in our app so we can see what it looks like. So this is what the URL looks like, and then the ID goes after this equals. So we can use an F string, and we can say a result of ID. And that should generate the URL for us. So I'll just put an F in the beginning. And now what we can do is we can work on passing this data to our function. So we're going to need a list of the video data. So let's just create that here. So videos is list, and we just append this dictionary to videos. So videos.append video data. And then we'll pass this to the template. So videos equals videos. Inside the template, let's work on adding that. So we need to look at where a card begins and ends. So it begins here for card MB4, and it ends, well, actually no, above that. So here, so we can put a loop around that. So for video and videos, and then it ends here. And then we can try putting one thing. So like the video title, we can say video.title. And if it works, then we should see the title when we refresh. And we have invalid syntax. So the F string isn't working because of the quotes. So if I go back to routes, and then the F string, this should be double quotes because I'm using single quotes for the string already. So now let's try this again. Okay, so now we see some titles. So we know it's loading properly, and then it has the placeholders at the end. So since we know the videos are coming in properly, we can remove the placeholders now. So basically everything after N4. And I'll leave the last one so I know where it ends. So there. And then the last one goes here. So I can remove this div. Yeah. So if I try that again, I only see 9 videos. Okay, so now let's work on putting the rest of the information in there. Let's put in the thumbnail. So the thumbnail is just going to be a URL. So this is going to be video.thumbnail. And then the actual link to the video is going to be here. So I'm going to change this button to a link and then make the href equal to video.url. So let's see. Okay, so now we see thumbnails. We still have the title. Let's try clicking on one. So this is my video. If I click on it, I see it takes us to the video. If I try a different one like this one, it takes us there. So the links are working. So the only thing that we need is the duration. So if we try putting the duration in, so video.duration, let's see what happens. So we have this weird format from YouTube, but this can be parsed. We just need another library for this. So we're going to install it with pip-inv. So pip-inv install isodate. And we're going to use isodate to convert that string into minutes. So I'm going to say from isodate import parse duration. And I can take this function parse duration and use it here. So I can use parse duration and then put the duration inside of here. And then I can call the total seconds function. And now let's see what happens. Something doesn't work because I didn't start up my server. Let's try that again. Okay, so now we see this is 2,819 minutes. That's not correct because that's the number of seconds the video is. So we can just divide this by 60 to get the number of seconds. So divided by 60. And now let's try. Or the number of minutes, I should say. So now we have 46.98 minutes. And that looks about right. We want to make this a float, so we just add the extra slash, so it just will give us a whole number. And then we want to convert it to an int to get rid of the .0. So int's there, and then the closing parenthesis. And now we see the duration. So we have all the information we want for each video. So the next thing that we want to do is we want to allow the user to actually type in a query, because right now this query is hard coded. So it's always going to be the same query. But what I want to do is I want to take in the data from the user and put it here in the query. So we're going to use the form. So let's find where that input is and create a form around it. So we can put a form up here. So form method will be post. It's going to post to the same endpoint, and we'll close out the form under these links. We can convert these links to buttons. So button here, and then the closing tags as well. And then we can remove these hrefs. And because we have 2 buttons, we want them both to be submit buttons. So type submit. And we'll give them different names. So actually both names will be submit, but we'll give them different values. So value is going to be search for this one. And then for this one, the value will be lucky. And then here we need a name for the input. So let's call this name, and then let's say query. And then this label doesn't need to be username. We're going to use this as a query. So to get access to this information in my route, I need to import the request object. So requests, and this is different from the library request. So this has an S on it, while this has no S. And basically what we'll do is we'll have a case for posts. So if request method is posts, we'll just put everything that follows in that block. So all this is going to go into the post request because this is done once the search query is submitted. But this render template is going to be on the same level because we want this to return for both get requests and post requests. So we need to allow for both here in our methods. So methods, get and post. And then down here, since we're passing videos, we need to make sure that videos is created outside of here. So we'll just put videos equals videos. So now if we go back and just perform a get request, we see there are no search results. And then when we perform the search result, we get the actual things here. But it's still just performing the query that we have hard coded. So we want to take this query. So let's say learn JavaScript and pass it so we can actually get JavaScript results. So let's do that now. So what we want to do is modify the query. So this queue part. So we're going to use the request object and say request and then form.get. And then we're going to use the name of the input, which is query. And that should be all it takes to change the query. So let's run this. Let's type in learn JavaScript, YouTube search. And now we see JavaScript videos. If I want to say learn Java, we see Java tutorials. And let's try one more. Learn Scala. We see Scala videos. So we have the YouTube search working. The last thing we want to do is work on the I'm feeling lucky. So what we want to do is we want to redirect to the URL of the first result when they click I'm feeling lucky. So we don't want to display the results here. So what we can do is find a good place to put it. So we're going to do the I'm feeling lucky redirect after we get the results and the video IDs. And then what we want to do is check to see if this is a I'm feeling lucky query. So what we can do is say if request form get submit, because the submit is the name, is equal to lucky. This is where we're going to redirect. So we're going to import redirect up here. So redirect. And we're going to use that in that if statement. So return redirect. But what we want to do is we want to redirect to the first video. So what we can do is use that same F string for the URL. So we'll just copy this and put it here. And this just needs to be the first ID of video IDs. So I'll just take video IDs and I'll get the first result out of it. So now let's try performing an I'm feeling lucky query. Learn Flask, I'm feeling lucky. And it takes us directly to YouTube to the first video. If I try that again, learn C, I'm feeling lucky. Then we have a C video. And of course, I can still perform the search and get the results here. So it looks like everything is working in our app. So that's it for this video. If you have any questions about this video, feel free to leave a comment down below. Don't forget to get the Flask cheat sheet. And if you want the code for this video, you can go to the link in the description as well. So thank you for watching this video, and I will talk to you next time.